Hi, I'm Zach,
And I'm Kyle.
and this is Those Who Conspire. Hey, everybody, welcome back to a brand new episode of Those Who Conspire. I am wildly excited today because we are covering quite possibly one of my favorite conspiracies of all time. Well, we'll discuss whether or not it's a conspiracy. MK Ultra. And obviously my co-host for this week is Kyle Moody, as always, as he is every week. How you doing, man?
For those that are not joining us via our web platform, via the video platform,
Our
you
web
have to see.
platform?
Yeah, if you haven't dialed in via your CompuServe, you need to all of a sudden get ready. Like, seriously, you should see the excitement on Zach's face right now. It is infectious. So it's a poll for you if you're not watching us online to catch us on our YouTube channel of Those Who Conspire. Zach, why do you like MK Ultra so much?
Oh man, what is not to like about it? First of all, it is everything that you would see in a horrific conspiracy horror movie where like the government is just doing wide just overreaching experiments on Americans and people around the world, and just nobody in the government gave a shit, and the only person that did died of mysterious circumstances. It's just no one gave a shit. It feels like it's a movie because it's so horrific that it's hard for your brain to understand that it actually happened.
Yes, and you're giggling about it like you're one of the most fascistic listeners imaginable, too. We're like, government overreach and malfeasance and psychological instruments of torture. Yes.
I don't understand why you're not excited about this. This is the greatest, like, I don't know. It feels like for the first time we are on par. I'm just going to move my camera around indiscriminately, apparently. This is the for people not watching the video, you're welcome, because the camera movement will make you sick. It's like watching what's that movie called where the giant monster Cloverfield. It's like watching. I'm gonna cut that. Listen, listeners.
No, okay. Come on. We've got Cloverfield, which is another hidden governmental operation, so why not use it, okay?
Yeah.
M Cloverfield Ultra.
M Cloverfield Ultra. That'll be the third one that is completely unrelated to the first two in the series.
Exactly. Okay, but somehow we have to tie it in together because we have a Netflix deal. So let's do it.
That's true. That's true. Netflix. They've got the Great British Bake Off.
That's it?
That's it.
I
That's
have
all I got. That's all
I
I
have a
got.
Stranger Things poster right up here where we're recording, and you're just like the Great British Bake Off. We're not talking about Lupin. We're not talking about their other works like The Crown. We're not talking about their contributions to reality television. The Great British Bake Off. This is where we're going with this, okay? On an episode that's all about your love of like true crime, which is what we're talking about, true crime. And you give me Brits and cakes?
Yeah, look, I only want to talk about things that make me happy, okay? I want to talk about the Great British Bake Off. I want to talk about Avatar: The Last Airbender, and I want to talk about MK Ultra. Those are the three things that make me happiest. Not necessarily in that order, you know?
I
Could be in any order.
cannot believe MK Ultra gets rated above Korra of all things. I'm just
Well,
having a rough
I
time.
don't know. Everybody has personal preferences.
All right. Well, before we get started, again, listeners, if you haven't already abandoned us because Zach is about to unleash his pure happiness at seeing like complete governmental overreach and
Oh, for
like
sure.
all the horror of everything the Tea Party was fighting against, you can reach out to us at thosewhoconspire@gmail.com. We're taking listener suggestions and ideas, and those are actually going to be turned into some future episodes. If you have any questions and want to get in touch with us on Facebook or Twitter, you can reach out to us on our Facebook page, Those Who Conspire. Same for us on Twitter, @ConspireWho. If you want to just reach out to one of us individually, if you're upset at Zach for being so happy about all of this, you can reach him at Zach_Hightower at Twitter, or reach him on Instagram at Real Hightower. I myself, on all platforms, you can find me at Kyle is Moody. So I want to get into the meat of this episode because this is kind of like the Super Mario 64 of conspiracy theories. It's only possible on the Ultra. That is an That is a shout out to the original Nintendo Ultra 64 idea for the concept right there that like 5 of our listeners are going to get. Zach's ultimately impressive like response is worth every bit of it. I'm going to
I
shut up
didn't
now.
even know that. I didn't even know that.
How did you
No, I'm a Nintendo fanboy. You know me, and I did not know about that.
Holy crap! How this is wild to me. How is this not like a lodestar in our conversation pieces? Okay, all the things that we've talked about Nintendo, the fact that you own so much about this, you did. Okay, so that's going up on our socials immediately, and I'm sharing it with you on Twitter. You should. I mean, I'm not even going to chastise you too much about the sick glee with which you are looking at 20 years worth of horrific experiments that were done on American citizens. Sir, I am shaming you for not knowing the concept ideas behind Nintendo's follow-up to the Super Nintendo. Shame on you!
I had no idea. I look at the finished product and I go, it is good. You know? That's what I do. In case you're wondering, I was, in fact, quoting God.
Why?
All right, everybody, let's go ahead and get into it.
Okay, so Zach, what is MK Ultra before we're struck down by lightning?
Okay, so MK Ultra was the secret experiments that the CIA did. It was actually called Project MK Ultra, to try to figure out if mind control was possible. And they did this in 2 ways, all right? There's 2 steps to this. One, they had to completely figure out a way to destroy the consciousness or the brain of somebody. And then 2, they wanted to figure out a way to replace that brain with somebody else's, where, they could tell someone to go kill someone, like a Manchurian Candidate thing, where you could just say like toothpaste, and then it'd be like, oh, I want to kill everybody, and then like the code word would be like floss, 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 and they're like, oh, okay, I'm back, let's get a burger, like that kind of thing.
Why did this happen though? Because to me, the why of it is really interesting and creates a sort of weird justification for it. In the 1950s and 60s, remembering that this is the height of the Cold War in post-World War II America, where we're afraid of communist countries using their power to overtake the democratic systems of the United States, and we can talk about that more in history terms. The U.S. government feared that the Soviet, Chinese, and North Korean agents were using mind control to brainwash U.S. prisoners of war in Korea. That's actually the whole basis for the Manchurian Candidate, is our enemies are already using this, so now we're going to create these plans. Do you remember when the original Manchurian Candidate movie came out? The Frankenheimer movie?
Okay, if I just look at what it is, it's a dark conspiracy government thing, so I'm assuming it happened after 1968, so I'm guessing, what, 71?
1962. Manchurian
1962?
1962. What? Yeah, this is a fantastic movie for those that haven't seen the original that is now almost 60 years old and still holds sway over multiple other people. But the idea behind the Manchurian Candidate is that there's a sleeper agent that was produced out of the Cold War that goes out and commits atrocities, and then they can claim plausible deniability due to the fact that these sleeper agents can only be triggered by certain words in there. It's a pretty iconic movie, featuring, Frank Sinatra, Lawrence Harvey, Janet Leigh, Angela Lansbury. I mean, if you've ever seen Murder, She Wrote and then want to imagine Angela Lansbury as a murder chiefess, yeah, that's awesome.
It was actually run by someone named Sidney Gottlieb, and... Oh, go ahead.
I want to hear more about Gottlieb, because you were really... In our text before we started recording this, you were explicit about wanting to cover Gottlieb, so jump in.
Well, okay, so Gottlieb is, so there was a new book that came out a couple of years ago called The Poisoner in Chief, right? And it's written by Stephen Kinzer, and it is all about the person who ran MK Ultra. His name was Sidney Gottlieb, and he's such an interesting person, because when you look at him on the face of it, as Stephen Kinzer described him, he was kind of like... He was kind of like a hippie before hippies were a thing. Like, he was like very spiritual, and like he liked living in nature and being one with nature and stuff like that. But then he just turned around and did these horrific atrocities to people. And That's just such a fascinating idea to me.
Yeah, I mean, he's a scientist. It should be known
Yep.
that he's an agency chemist and a scientist, and he was also a poison expert. He believed that the agency could harness LSD's mind-altering properties for brainwash and psychological torture. But he also thought of himself as a peaceful individual, and after his work with MK Ultra, he spent the rest of his life in a matter of trying to atone for what he did. The totality of what he did is actually never been fully grasped. Like, it's amazing what we do have in terms of knowledge about MK Ultra and what Gottlieb's experiments were, but we don't have everything. So, what were some of the things that Gottlieb was involved with that you found interesting?
He wanted to figure out, like, okay, so experiments like this at the time in America had never actually been done. At least there are no records of them actually being performed, right? So what they had to do is they had to look towards experiments that other people had done in other countries. So naturally, right after World War II, they, brought in all of the Nazi scientists and experimenters and torturers to start asking them questions about efficient ways to kill people, which is also super interesting. So this was a part of Operation Paperclip, and which we discussed, I think, briefly in the what episode is that? I think the first time we actually talked about Operation Paperclip was probably the UFO one. The most recent was, what's the one episode we did? Oh, the space one, the moon walking, the moon landing, fake moon walking. That's what I call it, the fake moon walking one. Yeah,
Yes.
yeah.
So so we're Michael Jackson just sliding forward on the floor.
Yeah, Operation Paperclip was instrumental in that move happening. What Gottlieb did was bring in the Nazi scientists, right? And they gave lectures to the CIA. This is on the record, by the way. These are actual government paperwork that we have that we can look at on the use of sarin gas, and noted at one point that the age of the victim does not correlate with how much sarin gas you use, meaning that sarin gas in certain amounts can be used to kill anyone of any age, which is a crazy thought, because why do they know that? It's kind of like when scientists say that in battle, testicles shrink up on men, which I remember when somebody told me that in biology, and I was like, oh, that's really interesting. But then my first thought was, how the hell do they know that? Like, at what point did a scientist go, hey, what happens to a ball sack when you have a sword?
Zach, this is not the point where you have to question the scientific method and hypothesis testing and solution. This is one of the things where you need to go in and also ask, aren't you just glad that we have people that are asking these questions? Like,
oh yeah,
that's us. That's Usk? Usk? Wow,
that's
okay.
Usk. Yes,
That's Usk, okay.
It's the new scent from Axe.
Oh my god, we actually had the same thought. Axe body spray. Conspiracy theorists version, alright? Just spray it all over us and we basically start yelling like Mel Gibson in Conspiracy Theory, too.
God, if MK Ultra would have happened in the mid-2000s, everyone would have gotten dosed by Axe body spray. They would have just put that, every 20-year-old male was just like he put an X on his body every day, as if to know that the smell itself would repel women at the bar.
Let's just start a conspiracy theory right now, which is that Axe body spray was an experiment that was done on men in their early to mid-20s in the early 2000s that was taught basically about the possibility of pheromones, but also of logical tracking. Could I necessarily track a person through olfactory sensation? And the answer is yes. Based on my college experience, I knew exactly where that person wearing Axe body spray was at all times. It was usually in my class. Please stop spraying that, you stinky, stinky dudes. All right? It was just one of those things that we could tie in. But that's the thing. Let's go back to actually MK Ultra for a second. Like, what did we learn about with this? We were trying to see whether mind control was possible. Think about that for a second. In the 1950s, we had this idea that we could control prisoners of war, but also control American soldiers and, in some ways, American citizens. There was this idea of paranoia and sleeper agents, people who were not what they seem. This led to, of course, McCarthyism and its many horrifying societal implications, a lot of which came about, again, during the Trump administration, which, Jesus, why? But I was really fascinated when I was reading this, and I learned about what we tested. Like, we used MDMA, barbiturates, we tested out so many other things, like LSD. We didn't just test LSD on other Americans. Like, we had people sign up for this. This took place on college campuses like Stanford and Cambridge. This is wild that this occurred right here. Like, let's see, Columbia University, Stanford University, these were places where studies were funded by the CIA to test effects of drugs like LSD. I mean, obviously, it's too unpredictable, but we didn't just test it right there. Can I talk about Midnight Climax? Operation Midnight Climax?
Oh, yeah, sure. They, yeah. Go for it. Hit it up.
I mean, because this is cool if, like, you're into Overreach.
I just want to say, just for the listeners who know absolutely nothing about this and why we're mentioning LSD, Gottlieb convinced the CIA to purchase the entire world's supply of LSD in 1953, which at the time was $240,000 worth, which with inflation right now is around $2.5 million, right? Yeah, so that's why, because he thought that LSD would help wipe somebody's brain. It ends up he might have been on the right track.
Let's also just mention, that seems like a low figure for getting at the world's LSD. Like,
oh, yeah.
I mean, how much are we spending now on paparazzi seeking out photos of Benifer 2.0? This is just unacceptable that you have to spend more on paparazzis than you actually have to spend on LSD from around the world. Anyways, Operation Midnight Climax. This was an MK Ultra project in which government-employed prostitutes lured unsuspecting men to CIA safe houses where drug experiments took place. I'm gonna read that again, because that is a sentence. It was an MK Ultra project in which government-employed prostitutes lured unsuspecting men to CIA safe houses where drug experiments took place. What would happen? Well, when a man loves a woman, no. The CIA dosed the men with LSD, and then, while at times drinking cocktails behind a two-way mirror, which is just that type of detail that you really love to hear, they watched the drug's effects on the unsuspecting men's behavior. Recording devices were installed in the prostitutes' rooms disguised as electrical outlets. Most of the Operation Midnight Climax experiments took place in major metro areas, San Francisco and Marin County, California, and in New York City. The program had little oversight, which, yeah, and the CIA agents involved admitted that a freewheeling party-like atmosphere prevailed. Who would have thought that giving a government agency carte blanche with prostitutes and mind-altering psychedelics would end up with this too? Oh my god!
Can you believe the luck of that guy who lucked out and that was his position? Like, he was just like, all right, I just got in the CIA. I don't know what I'm going to do, but I don't want to have to kill anybody. I'm feeling a little weird about it. They're like, hey, so what if we just gave a bunch of dudes a bunch of drugs and then they had a bunch of sex in front of you and then you just drank cocktails and recorded the whole thing and wrote stuff down? And he's like, I could do that.
Well, there is...
that seems like a job.
Yeah, there's already one person that already wrote about this to Gottlieb in 1971 about Operation Midnight Climax. An agent named George White, which probably isn't... Is that a...
Yeah, it's probably not his name.
Yeah, I was going to say, that had to be a pseudonym, because the real name of it... No. They wrote to Gottlieb in 71, "Of course, I was a very minor missionary, actually a heretic, but I toiled wholeheartedly in the vineyards because it was fun, fun, fun. Where else could a red-blooded American boy lie, kill, and cheat, steal, deceive, rape, and pillage with the sanction and blessing of the All-Highest?" That is some dense shit right there. That
Wow.
is one of
I'd
those
never heard that quote before. That's
it
crazy.
is one of those things that I've read in this research for it. I just went, wow, that is.
Love.
Oh,
No. Oh, sorry. I was telling you, my wife is leaving for the day. Sorry, I just told her I love her.
I was gonna say there's just like a random "love you" thrown in the middle of the pod.
Love you. Yeah. Love you. You're talking about these horrific things, and I'm like, see you tomorrow, baby. See you tonight.
But you're just actually tying in with what like old Georgie here had to say, right? You know, this was my job. I worked 9 to 5 in the sex and like drugging industry, in government sanctioned work. Obviously, now that we have things like institutional review boards and internal review boards, and there are accounts that we have to answer for within the academy and within the scientific community, this is not something that could happen again, or hopefully should not happen again. But the fact that it is causing us just to laugh. Like, I get your gleeful enthusiasm now, because writing this down, just looking at it, your brain kind of explodes in an orgiastic feeling. This is incredible.
They would do other stuff too. Like they would experiment on prisoners and not tell the prisoners what was happening to them, or that they were given LSD, because I guess because they couldn't know, right?
No.
It would affect the results. I mean, I was watching a documentary about this, and one of the CIA guys that was in charge of the programs, not Sidney Gottlieb, he stayed a ghost his entire life. We will talk about that. But there was a different person that was like second in charge of the CIA, and he was talking about how it was important that subjects don't know they're on LSD, because once you know you're on LSD, the actual, experience of you being high changes, because you can, with LSD, I've never done LSD. To be honest, you know me. I'll just tell you if I've done drugs. I've never done an LSD. But I will say that the people that I know have say that you can control the high a little bit if you know it's there. So it was important that the CIA not tell them, because then you would get a true result from somebody who has no idea they've ingested it.
So we're recording this the week that Norm Macdonald passed away after a 9-year battle with cancer. And I mean, one of the last jokes that Norm Macdonald told on the Late Show with David Letterman, he was actually talking about LSD and how, he's not a drug person, but somebody said, in his joke, he said, somebody told me not to take LSD because you could just all of a sudden get flashbacks. And he said, so basically, I get high once, and then I get high again 20 years later. Seems like a great value for a drug right there. And I thought, what a Norm Macdonald way to say it. So everything you just said is scientifically accurate, and it just makes me mourn one of the greatest comedians of our time. So sorry for that ADD moment, but it's true, though. You can't just, ping around so much.
I had a couple of opportunities in my life to go see Norm Macdonald live, and I just never did it. And I completely regret that. Just like I regret having an opportunity to see Mitch Hedberg live 3 weeks before he died. And I did not do it. Which, in hindsight, people tell me that have seen him in, his late career shows. They were okay.
I actually saw Mitch Hedberg at Zanies in Nashville whenever I first went to Western Kentucky. So yeah, it was before you got there. It was a year before you went to school there. But it was it two? Never mind. It was a year before that, and I got to say, it was a phenomenal show. Just absolutely phenomenal.
When my freshman year at Western, I knew that Mitch Hedberg was going to be at Zanies in Nashville, and I was like, oh, tickets are only $20. I would love to go do that. I asked my roommate, and he didn't want to go. I called you, and you said, I saw him before, so I can't, and I have an exam. And I said, okay. And then, I contacted, 4 other people. Nobody could go. And I was like, well, I'm not going to drive to Nashville by myself and go see Mitch Hedberg. So I didn't, and then he died 3 weeks later.
So basically...
And that's exactly... Yeah.
Oh, man, I'm now so sorry. Holy shit, you put that on blast for me for 20 years.
No. Dude, it was 20. I contacted, seriously, probably 10 people. You were the second person I contacted just because you weren't the person in the room with me. So it wasn't your fault that I didn't see him. I mean, I wouldn't have gone either if I saw him the year before.
I just want to say, like, you know, for our listeners who have kept with us and our viewers, so thank you. If you get the chance to go see people in the wake of COVID-19, you should prize that opportunity to do it. Obviously, loved ones and responsibilities come first, but yeah, this is one of the things that we talk about over time. As the older we get and the more we think about it, it's just like, I wish I'd done that. Have no regrets.
Yeah.
Go off and do the things that you find would be engaging and illuminating, like learning about some of our favorite authors that were part of Project MK Ultra. Ken Casey, he wrote the book One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest in 1962. He volunteered for MK Ultra experiments with LSD while he was attending Stanford University. He obviously later on went on to promote the drug. It was famous that he would throw these famous parties called the acid tests, and he would have bands like the Grateful Dead come in and play. These parties would influence the early development of things like hippie culture and the psychedelic culture that overtook the San Francisco Haight-Ashbury scene in the 1960s. But there were other notable people who volunteered, reportedly, for CIA-backed experiments with LSD. Robert Hunter, Grateful Dead lyricist, so if you listen to Uncle John's band, that's them. Ted Kaczynski.
There are 2 or 3 other people famous, like, killers that also were a part of these experiments too.
Yeah, Whitey Bulger.
Get to that.
Whitey Bulger.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
The Boston mobster. I mean, so this has ties with where I am right now. So it's pretty fascinating to see how deep this goes.
Whitey Bulger said that he was experimented on in 1957, and ever since then, he said he can't sleep at night. Well, he's dead now, but at the time, he said he couldn't sleep at night. He said he would sleep for 2 or 3 hours at a time, but he still would, every time he would close his eyes and dream, he would have vivid nightmares of just like violent acts. And he said that he remembers when he was getting experimented on, he would just be high out of his mind. And people would start asking him, do you feel like killing people? Do you feel like doing this? And he did not connect those dots until 2013 that he was actually experimented on, and the timeline lines up.
This is one of the things that is so insidious about MK Ultra, is so much of it is in secrecy, but none of it paints the CIA in a particularly compelling and favorable light. Nowhere more so than Frank Olson. Do you want to touch on Frank Olson? Because I think that was one of the ones that you wanted to cover.
Frank Olson was a chemist who actually worked in the MK Ultra project, right? And long story short, in November 1953, he threw himself out of a 13-story window in New York City and plunged to his death and died. Here's the thing, though, about Frank Olson. Apparently, about a month before he died, he started feeling really bad about all the experiments, and he wanted out. He started telling them that he wanted out, right? He also mentioned it to his family, his friends, and at one point, inside the CIA, said the words, "I might go to a reporter." And then shortly after, he was dosed with LSD secretly. He had no idea what was happening.
Where was he dosed?
And he was dosed at a...
It was a CIA retreat in 1953.
He was secretly dosed, and 11 days later, he threw himself out of a 13-story window. There are questions here, because... For years, everyone said that it was suicide, right?
Right.
But the problem is that the family never really believed it because they never got a full answer from the CIA.
Right.
So in 2000, I think in 2000, no, it was the 90s.
1994.
Right? In 1994, they actually exhumed the body. And the investigators found that there was a bruise on the front of Frank Olson's head. Now, that may seem like a funny thing to say because obviously he fell 13 stories to his death. But think about it this way. So later, you realize that Sidney Gottlieb, I actually put out a memo one time, and what it was is it was a way to like kill people, and he said one of the most efficient ways of killing someone is throwing them out of a window and making it look like suicide. But in order to do so, you had to hit them hard on the front of their forehead to stun them first, and then you can throw them out the window. So while there isn't any direct evidence saying that the CIA killed Frank Olson, it's kind of heavily implied.
It's not just that it's heavily implied. There's also the settlement that comes in, where after prolonged legal proceedings, Olson's family was awarded a settlement of $750,000 and received a personal apology from President Gerald Ford and then CIA Director William Colby. We're going to touch on Ford's involvement in all of this because the timeline of MK Ultra and its revelations to the American people have to tie in some way to our bigger understanding of what the story is and why it ties in with conspiracy theories.
Look, I'm not trying to put a price on a human life, but I feel like it's not $750,000. I feel like it's a little bit more than that. I mean, when was this settlement? 1922?
Clearly not, but you're looking at you're looking in the 1970s when this happens too. But this is 20 years after Ford's death or Olson's death, and then you have 20 years later when they finally pull up the autopsy itself. This shows just how hard it is for people to get information about MK Ultra and how over time we learn so much in there as well. I remember when we did the mini pod on the alien, the UFO, UAP phenomena, and we saw that this was finally coming out after 70 some odd years of sightings and news and information. So government moves slow, and I say that knowing what bureaucracy is like. So that's just the reason why. It's not really compelling, but that is also kind of the weird, sad denouement of all of this is, you know, at the end, we have a lot of fun during the party, but at the end, people died. A lot of people died with this.
Oh yeah. Let's get to like, I know I'm like weirdly gleeful about this. I love true crime and I like really dark stuff. I don't know why. I've just always been that way. But I just want to take a moment because like a lot of the stuff we're talking about is like horrific, but like in like a fun way, you know what I mean? But like honestly, like some of the experiments they did were just, they were horrible. And I'm just going to say a couple of those. In 1953, radioactive iodine was injected into newborns and pregnant women in Iowa to see what the effects of radioactivity on newborns are. In 1955, the CIA sprayed whooping cough bacteria into Tampa. Dozens and dozens and dozens of people got sick and 2 people actually died. And this was just on the general public. They did not announce this. They didn't say this was going to happen. Let's see. In 1956, under the CIA, the Army released millions of mosquitoes carrying yellow fever. And there were several deaths, including hundreds of people that were infected and had to be hospitalized. In 1960 in Cincinnati, the Army did radiation experiments on the destitute and ill inhabitants of the university's hospital.
Oh, man.
And after several weeks, there were more deaths. Oh, it just gets worse. In 1966, a virus was tested in the subway systems in New York and Chicago. The bacteria was spread through special electric bulbs, and the study was meant to see how spreading chemical agents on a large scale would work, right? So these are just people just going to work. This one is horrible. In a prison in Lexington, Kentucky, 7 African-American inmates were segregated into a cell and fed triple doses of LSD every single day for 77 days straight to see what would happen to their brains. And all jokes aside, they were not okay after that. I never found what happened to those men, but I can't imagine that they were mentally sound after 77 days of just being on triple doses of LSD. This is the last one, and this is the horrifying one for me.
The others aren't horrifying enough?
No. This last one feels like it's an experiment from a like mad scientist in a movie. You know, like it's something that it was in a movie. I'd go, that's the most ridiculous thing I've ever seen. That's unrealistic, and this is what freaks me out so much. So, so MK Ultra had basically torture houses all around the United States and all around the world, right? They would take people that they called expendables, by the way, which would only make yeah, I'm not even going to make a joke about that. People would take expendables, what they deemed as expendables, which were unwed mothers, people of color,
Right.
people from the street, and they would take them to these houses and do these crazy experiments on them. One of them was located in Germany, and this there's actual documentation on. What Gottlieb did was injected a prisoner with an overdose of sedatives and then injected them in the other arm with a massive overdose of barbiturates, right? So they would be in a coma, but also hyperactive at the same time, which is already, obviously pretty messed up. And then while they were in this state, they would do electric shock on the body, but at the same time, they were inside essentially a sensory deprivation tank. And these people did not survive. I mean, they were basically just doing experiments and then throwing away the bodies. Like one of the reports that I saw said that there was a house. I can't remember where it was. It was in the United States. I should have looked up the location better, but I can't remember. But it was in the United States. And what the CIA did was they just did torture experiments, and nobody that went in that wasn't a part of the CIA came out alive. These people went into the house and they died. And people in this town know that house is there. They know the history of the house. And what they said the CIA did was take the bodies out and bury them in the woods. And then conveniently in the 70s, all of that was mowed over and then cemented on. So now they're just malls. So in a town in America, there's just a mall with hundreds of CIA tortured like bodies underneath it, which is insane.
So basically, this is the X-Files, everything they talk about in here. I mean, that is horrifying in there. I mean, when you look at the totality of this, it's the reason that people believe in other conspiracy theories, right? I mean, these are things that are happening, and they're documented and they're brought up with like the Black Vault. Have you read about that?
No, I've read about the Black Vault.
Yeah, the Black Vault is a document archive where I got a lot of this too, where they've been a collection of different FOIA documents regarding MK Ultra, but this is where the biggest collection of it comes from. And so they filed a FOIA request for all documents pertaining to MK Ultra back in the late 90s. They had multiple documents that were held up, and they did eventually get it through 4 CD-ROMs received back in 2004, and it was one of the first places to upload the entire collection of MK Ultra results onto the internet. And then there were also pieces that were missing. In March of 2016, a visitor to the Black Vault found the MK Ultra collection, reviewed the index of files, and released the records for comparison to see if they matched, compiled a list of missing documents, and then later on they read them. And I was looking at the accounting letters regarding hypnosis, Project Artichoke, which that is a very fascinating thing, because that actually takes place even before the timeline for hypnosis too. You begin to see how trips are set up and experimentation and operational types. You begin to see how using these different drugs comes into play right here. All of this is available, publicly available at the Black Vault if people want to go there and look at their MK Ultra collection. To me, when I'm looking at this, I'm just looking at declassification of images and content. I mean, we've talked about things like the military application of hypnosis, which ties into the Manchurian Candidate. We have things like chemical agents, interrogation studies, Project Bluebird that keeps showing up right here, which is another word for what they call it. Like there are multiple things about behavioral modification. All of this is there.
Mm-hmm.
But why we have this is one of the important pieces here. So just that this thing's not like an hour of us detailing atrocities, we need to make the timeline clear. This happened in the 1950s, is when Project MK Ultra was started. And it goes from about 1952 to 1953 until around 1973. So 20 years of experimentation by the CIA, until which point it's effectively shut down. Zach, would you like to tell me why you think that why you think MK Ultra was shut down based on that timeline? Because in 1973?
1973. Well, I mean, it was after the Manson murders, I guess. So that was 69. I don't. Oh, I'm gonna guess Watergate.
Absolutely. You have massive issues regarding government trust post Watergate, and this is the time in which paranoia drives the American cultural vernacular, right? You have with Watergate and All the President's Men, you have this understanding that the government is up to things that we don't even necessarily know. I mean, we have the release of the Pentagon Papers. We have news and completely shifting public opinion on Vietnam throughout this whole time. So this is a point where we're really questioning the role of the government in American lives. And in 1974, New York Times journalist Seymour Hersh publishes a story about how the CIA had conducted non-consensual drug experiments and illegal spying operations on American citizens. It brought those details about MK Ultra to light to the American people. And Gerald Ford, who, let's be clear, was basically brought in after Nixon's resignation to do cleanup on the American psyche, he sets up the U.S. President's Commission on CIA Activities within the U.S. to investigate illegal CIA activities, including Project MKUltra and other experiments on unsuspecting citizens. This is known typically as the Rockefeller Commission. The Church Committee, which was helmed by Idaho Democratic Senator Frank Church, is a larger investigation into the abuses of the CIA, FBI, and other intelligence agencies during and after the resignation of Nixon. This also delved into plots to assassinate foreign leaders like Fidel Castro and Congolese independence leader Patrice Lumumba. It also uncovered thousands of documents related to MK Ultra, which were later sent out in the FOIA agreement to the Black Vault. These revelations resulted in Ford's 1976 executive order on intelligence activities that prohibited experimentation with drugs in human subjects, except with the informed consent in writing and witnessed by a disinterested party of each human subject. That's the end of MK Ultra as we understand it, but the cultural ramifications are still being felt. Because this was a true event, people still believe that it goes on. And I don't think we've ever gotten back to the point where government trust is ever 100%. I mean, we see it now with QAnon.
No, never. I mean, absolutely. We'll never get that trust back. That's ruined now. But like, what's interesting actually about that church committee is that it's one of the only times that Sidney Gottlieb actually spoke on the record about stuff. And the crazy thing is the only reason that he didn't really get put to the fire was because nobody knew the levels of atrocities that this man had committed. So they didn't know what to ask him. So he got out pretty much unscathed. And he wasn't supposed to go back and speak under oath until much, much later. But we'll get to that. He also, at the time, Gottlieb, at this time, I believe, was essentially the version. No. Also at this time, around this time, Gottlieb had stopped doing crazy experiments and was essentially working as the Q of the CIA. So he was making like crazy assassination things. He was making like, one of the examples was a quarter where, a couple of millimeters was drilled out of the middle of it and then it was replaced with a tiny little syringe, right?
Yeah.
So when you touch it, it's so small that you would never know it's there, but you would die within 15 seconds. And that's the kind of things that he would just get.
Yeah, this is like Ian Fleming writing about it in James Bond novels. I mean, the reason James Bond's oeuvre ties in with this is because a lot of this is based on hearsay that you would have in the intelligence community here. Truth serum is essentially Gottlieb's creation, right? This is the idea that if you inject somebody with a drug, they're going to reveal their secrets. That's one of the goals behind MK Ultra, is the creation of that. The theory was that a Soviet agent could be dosed with LSD and induced to confess government secrets. It's surprising, though, that Gottlieb's work is pretty uncontrolled, though. There's almost no oversight to any of this. They're not afraid to use the word Nazi when they're referring to where his work is adjacent to, because it's Gottlieb's work is a continuation of a lot of Nazi work that was done in concentration camps. And you have to sit with that for a second. Like, for some of our more advanced listeners, the comparison is obvious. But for anybody that still does have, like, ideals about what Americans do and don't do, to look at this and learn about it's disheartening. That's me being nice.
One of the experiments that Gottlieb actually did was he lured somebody named Stanley Glickman to a bar, right? And this was in the 60s. I mean, this is in the 50s. And Stanley Glickman had hepatitis. And it is known that if you have hepatitis, your reaction to LSD is profoundly if you have hepatitis, your reaction to LSD is a lot stronger, okay? You're just going to get a much weirder experience, okay? It's going to be really intense. He knew that he had hepatitis, and he dosed him at this bar. Now, this guy was in art school. He was a painter. He, had his whole life in front of him, and that night ruined his literal life. He became homeless. He never painted again, and he never knew what happened to him. And 20 years later, his sister saw a report on TV about some of the horrific things that had happened in MK Ultra and recognized his exact story. So they actually formed a lawsuit against the CIA, which is also crazy fascinating. And, because it's the CIA, it went on for over 20 years. They just kept pushing it off and pushing it off and pushing it off, right?
Yeah.
And long story short, in 1999, they were about to have the trial. And the thing about this, the reason that this is a big deal and the reason I'm telling you this is because for the first time, Sidney Gottlieb was actually named as a defendant in the case, meaning that he had to show up and testify no matter what happened, right? Right before it happened, Sidney Gottlieb died. And his widow never said how he died. His body was immediately cremated. And the son of Frank Olson went, right after Gottlieb died, went and met the lawyer that was in charge of the lawsuit against the CIA, and they cheered, and they both talked about it, and they both realized, they both were like, oh, well, we think maybe Gottlieb killed himself just to get out of it. Here's the thing about Gottlieb. He was a ghost, and he wanted to be a ghost.
Yeah.
He didn't want to be seen. He didn't want to be connected to any of this. He did not care about that. He wanted to do his experiments, and he didn't need anyone to know about them, and he successfully stayed away and disconnected from MK Ultra for a very, very long time. And the one time that he was about to take the stand, he died, which is crazy.
It is absolutely wild how little we actually know, because Gottlieb himself not only stayed hidden, but he was actively trying to destroy the archives. When he retired from the CIA in 1973, he and director Richard Helms attempted to destroy the project's entire documentary archive. Like,
holy shit.
Yeah, he's the model for this idea. It's this sort of conspiracy theorist idea where you have a powerful person who has a bucolic existence and seems like a very good person at the front, and then underneath they are driving this sort of cliched, wild, extra legal operation. It's something that just doesn't come in to play until you understand who Sidney Gottlieb is. He's a patriot who did horrible things to Americans. And if you understand that, then you understand Project MK Ultra. But he genuinely believed in his work. And as an idealist, that might be the most scary thing of all.
Oh, yeah.
This is one of those things where you talk about it and you go, wow, this is really the basis for the American conspiracy theory.
Yeah.
Because MK Ultra exists and because so little of it is, from a 20-year span, so relatively little of it is actually known versus what we see, this opens the door for other conspiracies. Roswell truthers. You get to 9/11 as an inside job. It's weird that we get to the idea that
chemtrails.
Yeah, chemtrails.
Like those kind of things.
Yeah, it's weird to be talking about this after our September 11th episode where we refute 9/11 was an inside job conspiracies, and yet we have 2 decades worth of evidence for this. It is just a whiplash effect too. But I think that it's one of our better episodes because even though we come... And this is typical, like, those who conspire, right? Yeah, we're going to do something fun, and we're going to do everything else. And then we get to the horror stories, and at the end of it, we're just broken. Okay.
Yeah. The thing is like, you seem broken right now, and I do not. I'm just like, yeah. Like, it's so interesting. It's such a good story. Like, it's horrific. And a lot of people died. And to be honest with you, the body count, we'll never know.
No, we won't.
The exact body count of how many people died. We'll never know. And that's horrifying.
Yeah,
but it's exciting to talk about.
It is very exciting to talk about in a true crime documentary sense, but for anybody that holds on to a shred of ideals that you associate with your country, at this point you just shred them and you throw it on top of a pizza.
Yep.
It's done. Like, it's so bad I don't even call it Zaw. I can't believe it. It breaks me.
Oh God, we broke them. We broke them, ladies and gentlemen. We didn't even need Bigfoot 2.
Don't do this to me. Don't do this to me.
MK Ultra has broken another mind.
All right. The only MK Ultra that I needed was the Mortal Kombat trilogy on Nintendo 64. That's the real MK Ultra.
So, yeah, that's, I'm not really a Mortal Kombat guy. I don't know why.
Well, if I were fighting you, my finishing move would be friendship.
Oh, that was sweet. Speaking of finishing moves, Charles Manson was
No.
It is theorized that Charles Manson was a part of MK Ultra. Okay. When he was in prison before all of the crazy stuff happened in the 60s, he was in prison at the location at around the same time that they were doing MK Ultra experiments, correct? Right?
Yeah.
So, he was released from prison a bunch of times in the 60s, and then that's when things started getting crazy, and it's theorized that MK Ultra messed up Charles Manson's mind, which obviously directly led to the murders, the Tate Bianca murders. But the evidence to that, I'll just go ahead and say it, the evidence to that is a little loose. There's not airtight there, just because they just don't have the documentation on it, but the timeline lines up. So, as a conspiracy show, I just want to say that is a conspiracy, but I have no idea if it's true or not.
Right, and it's also, it gets Manson off the hook for his crimes, and in the reality of what he did, he was a leader via charisma and sensation, but he also did horrible things in there, and tying it to MK Ultra erases culpability in some ways, and so it doesn't seem like it works that way.
I'm going to go ahead and just say this real quick about Charles Manson, because I've done a lot of research on him, and to be honest with you, I think Charles Manson accidentally made everything happen. I think Charles Manson was an idiot. I don't think that he meant to do anything. All he wanted to do was write music and have sex and do drugs. That's all he wanted to do. And I think that things just kind of got away from him. I think Charles Manson was an idiot. I really do. I don't think he was smart at all. I think he was just did and said the wrong things at the wrong time. Not saying that he's not a horrible human being, because he is. But I am saying that I don't think he's the criminal mastermind that people thought he was.
Yeah, but Donald Trump was not a criminal mastermind either, and yet he occupied the White House, too. I mean, this is a man driven more by ego than by anything else, too, with a cold, black heart of a loveless childhood that was thus thrust upon him. I'm not trying to get all Mary Trump on here, because I think that the entire family
I thought we were still talking about Charles Manson. I was like, yeah, all that still lines up with Charles Manson.
No.
I don't know what you're talking about.
No, we're absolutely making parallels to our 45th president. And I think that I'd be remiss not to mention all those characteristics that go in. And I'm like, yeah, person who is of questionable intelligence and driven by ego still somehow finds a way to mess things up in a major way and fall backwards into success. And then ultimate catastrophic failure. Like, that's just the way that we're looking at it with Manson here.
Do you have anything else you want to cover for MK Ultra? I feel like we've done it pretty exhaustively.
There was this piece that ran in The Guardian regarding MK Ultra, and I wanted to read some quotes from it. It's really similar to how legends and folklore and myths are cultivated, where they have a nugget of truth at the core, but are made into something a lot bigger. The author wouldn't be surprised if the 1950s mind control program continues to inspire future generations, likening it to enduring conspiracy theories such as the JFK assassination. And just, listeners, we're going to do JFK this year.
I think they did them in 1963, didn't they? Hey-oh! Too soon? Come on, it's been 50 years.
It's been over that, and even still, I'm kind of like, I don't know. Yet, Wark says the fact MK Ultra has endured is something we should also be concerned about. Conspiracies allow us to make sense of the inexplicable in a world that's too complicated already, he says. MK Ultra, with its themes of mind controls, helps us to explain human-scale mystery. Otherwise, we have to grapple with abstract concepts, individuality, society, justice, whatever, that are always uncertain themselves. Mind control is easier to fathom. However, MK Ultra is also the canary for something all too apparent about the present. When it's easier to blame a conspiracy about mind control than it is to face our political differences, then something is very wrong. And so, I want to kind of end with that, because MK Ultra was a real thing that happened, but how we use it and study it, and then use it as a rhetorical device, is something that I want us to think about. So hopefully this episode has taught people something, and encouraged them to do further research on Sidney Gottlieb and the actual investigation into the American psyche. So I want to thank you for making it this far. Hey, Zach, what are we doing for October?
Oh, we're doing some spooky shit.
Yeah!
We've got an episode about the Mothman coming up with a special guest.
Yep.
We have, do you want to say who the special guest is?
No.
Okay,
no.
cool.
No, they'll promote it whenever they get ready here.
Surprise, it's the Mothman. Yeah, he's back, baby.
The actual Mothman. We booked the actual Mothman.
The Mothman. His agent is impossible to get a hold of.
It is terrible, too. It was an old MySpace page that you had to wait for, like, an old Lily album song to load. It was so hard.
It was terrible. Let's see. We've got an episode about feral people in the
in national parks.
Which I'm very excited about. That is something I've just chef's kiss.
Yeah, that one's going to be a good one. But for me, the one that we're going to be covering, the internet is dead.
Yeah. Ooh, it's spooky internet.
I know.
And y'all are hungry because y'all about to have some spooky crisps. That's all we got for this week on Those Who Conspire. Thank you. I'm joking.
Oh, yeah, and then don't forget, we're also going to cover the missing Roanoke colony right there. That's one of the ones.
Yeah, the missing Roanoke colony. Yeah. I forgot about it. It's not on my schedule. It went missing.
I know, it just disappeared from your schedule.
Yeah.
And my thanks to Zach, as always, for being a fantastic partner who, Zach, toothpaste.
I have to pee.
Floss.
Whew. For a second there, I felt like I had to pee. Weird.
All right, well, this has been a great episode of Those Who Conspire, and as always, I'm Kyle.
And I'm Zach.
And thanks for listening.
Bye.